Tim Prister with the Drew Mentock from Irish Illustrated, joined once again by John Brice of FootballScoop. That was our last observation of practice for the preseason. We had a bunch of good interviews, so we've got a lot to cover here today. I want to start with Howard Cross because that was a big topic on Saturday. I wouldn't say that what we saw with the defensive line was going at full speed, but he was at 50 to 75%. He looked fine. Didn't see any special wrap on his, foot or ankle or anything like that. So that's good news. Reporting on Howard Cross. On the offensive side of the ball, again, we saw early practice. I don't want to read too much into this, but I think that they're looking at grooming Pat Coogan as the backup center. So he was taking snaps at center. At left guard was Sam Pendleton, who has struggled with snaps, and then at left tackle was Anthony Knapp. So whether that was just a start of practice kind of thing, or whether they went back to the usual starters or who we suspect in Tosh Baker and Coogan at guard, we'll see. But I don't want to read too much into that, but I just thought it was important that we mention that. Guys, we had some really good interviews today here and some observations. JB, let's start with you. I know that you saw the quarterbacks throwing the football. Got some feedback on the field from Mike Denbrock. What'd you see?
Yeah, I do want to mention on the offensive line, I think it's real. I think that this is a coaching staff determined to find their best five, whatever that may be. I think that we all agree they're concrete set from center out to the right flank, but there's still competition. There are still battles ongoing at left guard and left tackle, especially with the requisite need to have Pat Coogan as your backup center. And I think that's clear. We talked about it with T.O. Pat Coogan is going to be the number 2 center, but I think Pat Coogan is locked in a battle right now with Sam Pendleton to be that starting left guard. Rocco Spindler, Sullivan Absher, obviously guys in the mix. And Anthony Knapp just continues to impress. People are telling me that he plays beyond his years and that he doesn't seem to make the same mistake twice. That's a really big deal because there's a lot of belief in the ceiling of Anthony Knapp. And so this was our last viewing period of preseason camp. They'll wrap up the camp portion over the weekend and shift into Texas A&M prep. But Anthony Knapp's not going away. That's what I take away from the last 2 weeks of camp and from talking to people on campus. When you look elsewhere on the offense, I think Jeremiah Love continues to prove himself as probably Notre Dame's starting tailback. That doesn't mean the other guys aren't going to factor heavily into it, that Jadarian Price won't be featured, or that Aeneas Williams is not surging, because Aeneas Williams definitely is surging, I think, as the number 3 back. But Jeremiah Love just having a really good camp. And as Drew Mentock noted today, we saw Love flash out wide a little bit. So just some really interesting things there. Mike Denbrock preaching, drilling down on detail. I love that. I loved him stopping a session to say detail and to instruct a skill position player exactly what he needed to be doing, coming in motion, where he needed to set up, where he needed to anchor, and then how he needed to get out into his route. So praise some guys, but really harped on detail. I like that.
Drew, you spent some time with Jaden Thomas, a lot of time with Jaden Thomas and Chris Mitchell. Some really good comments, not only about the receiver position, but the guys that are defending them.
Yeah, Chris Mitchell specifically talked a lot about, he's really expanded his route tree since coming to Notre Dame. He used to just be a lot of goes and corner routes and choice routes, not much other detail to it. He's really honed in on that, and he's noticed the impact that has on going against guys like Ben Morris and Christian Gray every day. They've really had to kind of change how they play him in practice, and that's really he pretty much just said that he feels he wins more than 50% of the reps against those guys every day. And if those guys who kind of know his game, he can beat them, the guys that talented regularly, that's going to really translate to the season.
Well, he's got a lot of confidence in himself, and I would too if you are capable of beating a Ben Morse and a Christian Gray. Really interesting stuff from Jaden Thomas. He was engaged. I think you engaged him in conversation about Riley Leonard. He said he'd like his son to be like Riley Leonard. It's getting a little deep around here before the first game that Riley plays for Notre Dame. But again, all of these things that we've said about Riley Leonard have been echoed certainly by the players on the team.
Definitely. Jaden Thomas talked about he's kind of like a servant leader. He's incredibly humble, but he's also ultra competitive.
Yes. And
has a self-deprecating humor that really kind of endears somebody. He doesn't feel like, I don't know, holier than thou kind of thing. He's one of the guys, but he also has these amazing traits that they really enjoy seeing from the guy who's the leader of the offense.
Yeah, I would just quickly say, sorry, TP, along those lines, we've talked about it, the authenticity with Riley Leonard. That's what sticks out to you after another day like today. And I visited with Jaden Greathouse, and Pete Sampson and I were asking him specifically about Riley Leonard. Jaden Greathouse said that he's got an absolute swag about him that he brings onto the practice field. And he said, that fires us up. We want to play with and for a guy like that. When you're hearing guys talking about wanting to play for a guy like that, especially with Riley Leonard being in his first year in the program, I think that speaks volumes about Riley Leonard. Also, Jaden Greathouse saying that Riley Leonard does not hesitate to smack talk Jaden Mickey or anybody else on the defensive side of the ball. He said, look, that truly elevates our play.
More injury reports, not guys that are currently hurt, but guys that are coming back from injuries. Of course, two real key players for Notre Dame, Ben Morrison at cornerback and Mitchell Evans. We didn't have an opportunity to talk to Mitchell Evans, but watched him run around out there a little bit. He made a twisting catch and turned upfield, didn't seem hesitant at all coming off that ACL, so that's good news. Ben Morrison says that he hasn't been held back with anything, but he did have shoulder surgery he said 4 months ago. I think it's been a little bit longer than that now, so they've been smart about how much physicality that he's taking and has been involved in. And talking to Mike Mickens, he was a little bit guarded in saying too much about him, but there was no indication today that Benjamin Morrison has been or was limited today in anything he was doing. Again, no contact, and now we're looking at 16 days until he does have to take contact in a game, so I would think that they would start to ramp that up.
Yeah, he said he's been smart about it, but he said, look, I'm healed. And I asked him, when did you feel 100%? He goes, I don't know, but I'm healed. And those are his words. That's a direct quote. He said, I'm healed. You can tell he feels good. I asked him about diving onto the ground literally the opening day of training camp. He said, that's because I feel good. I'm healed. I'm ready to go. So he's not worried about the lack of contact. He's still been heavily involved. He's still been out there every single day. No real noticeable wrap on his shoulder today. He had one of those medical tapes down his shoulder underneath his long sleeve shirt.
You know, it's his right shoulder.
Right. Yeah. But no sort of heavy brace or anything like that. On a very, very confident. Also very confident in what he's seeing out of both Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey.
Drew.
Yeah, and I did ask Coach Mickens, if he's limited Ben Morrison in any way during practice, and he pretty much just kind of tried to sidestep the question and mention, well, I pay attention to the load of all my guys, so we've been careful with everyone. So it's hard to tell based on that interaction, but he's definitely been out there when we've seen him, and he looks good. But it'll be interesting to see him take contact in College Station.
Some real strong statements about Leonard Moore, the freshman cornerback, who was wearing a red jersey today, so he was limited. It was a sign to tell the people around him to not make contact with him. But some really strong statements, and frankly, he's flashed every time I've seen him in practice. Jaden Thomas was the one. Drew, you were there. He called him the truth.
Yeah, and he was asked, I think, by Eric Hansen, if he would compared to Ben Morrison. He's like, yes, they both, Ben Morrison and Jaden Thomas, both feel like he has the potential to be better than Ben Morrison. It's his length, his competitiveness, his physicality, and the way he just kind of gets there and competes from day one over the summer. Biggest thing is, I think, his footwork and some of those other technical aspects need to develop, but they were all very impressed and had no problem being guarded, or they didn't want to be guarded. They were ready to kind of anoint him already. Even
Morrison said had great things to say about Leonard Moore.
Yeah, even Morrison talking about how very high the ceiling is for Leonard Moore. And we discussed him on the Irish Illustrated podcast earlier this week as a guy that has continued to flash all camp. He's turned to the coaches' heads. He's obviously turning the heads of his peers. We know Marcus Freeman said we're going to have a freshman step up for us in one of those roles. That appears to be Leonard Moore from everything we're hearing right now, what we're seeing. I think he's also been fully engaged on special teams. And that doesn't mean he's going to start on a bunch of special teams units, but coaches pay attention to that, and if you invest in that, it gives them confidence in you to start trusting you in more stuff, start trusting you in the defense, seeing how you handle that, and it shows a maturity on his part to have that early special teams buy-in, similar with Logan Thomas and also similar with Brice Young on the defensive side of the ball, guys that play up front.
One note from early into practice, I was talking about the variations on the offensive line. Don Schuler was running with the number one offense at safety. Again, it was just a handful of plays. It was 11 on 11. We heard Mike Denbrock barking out there a little bit as they were going through that. That doesn't mean that Adon Schuler has won the job, but we know that Adon Schuler is going to be a significant player for Notre Dame this year. And lastly, Jordan Faison, spoke to him about punt returns. He says it's still him and Jaden Greathouse in the mix for that. He says it's difficult trying to catch James Rendell's punts because it's not conventional. It's not the typical spiral that the American football punters tend to hit. It's kind of all over the place. And Jordan Faison literally said that you can hear when James Rendell has really clicked one, really gotten a hold of one. So that 6'6", 220-pounder continues to impress on the Notre Dame practice field. That's all we have today from outside of Notre Dame Stadium. Tim Priester, Drew Mentock, and John Brice. This has been Irish Illustrated's Instant Analysis.